Hi, love. It's Lindsay Landry, energy healer, heart shaman, and mentor for healers and soul led entrepreneurs who are ready to create sacred success on their own terms with more ease, more flow, and more fun. So, welcome to this conversation. I'm delighted to be here and I'm a little nervous. It's interesting because I've been having conversations in my Facebook community, just hopping on live when I'm out at the park and walking and the energy's flowing. And I wanted to create a way to have more personal conversations and also to have everything in one space. So to have it more streamlined and easily accessible. And that's why I created this platform, right? But what I noticed is this conversation has been brewing for the past few days, and I'm feeling a lot of like nerves and anxiety around like getting here and just simply having this conversation with you. So I just want to name that. And what I want to dive into today is something that is on my heart personally. It's been activated really for a few weeks now, but it really came forward again this weekend. And it's a conversation around trauma and moving forward with trauma and also closing doors, chapters, and energy loops. So, yeah, I want to invite you to get cozy as we arrive here and deepen into this conversation. And so I'm feeling for where I want to begin. And I actually want to begin with what inspired this conversation. So, Friday, I brought Red, my pup, to get his rabies shot. And what I noticed after he got his shot is that I literally was spinning. I felt like I was highly energetically sensitive. I felt like I could feel his energy spinning, but I was spinning. I was dizzy. I felt like I had drugs, right? And so it's funny, and it's also not funny when you're experiencing this. So if you've ever been highly attuned to energy, and whether it's like a full moon or an eclipse, or maybe it's just the energy around you and you feel highly affected by it, it's not really a fun place to be, especially when you don't feel like you can turn down the volume or turn it off. And so I was noticing this for myself and just kind of trying to breathe and allow it. And we really didn't have much to do, so it wasn't that big of a deal. And I was scrolling Facebook and I saw a friend, and she had posted in her Facebook group an Ask Me Anything thread. And I adore her. And really, my intention for commenting at first was just to help her and her business, right? To bump her post and also to give her some ideas for content. And so she works with intuitives and she works with psychics and really teaches people to hone in on their energy and their gifts and bring their gifts to the next level. And so I shared this in her group, right? I shared the situation with the dog, that I was feeling his energy, and also this has been a very common thread for me since, especially since Hurricane Ida, which was 3 years ago when I lost my home in the hurricane, right? And I got this huge initiation into trauma. And so I asked these questions, and she ended up the next day sharing a podcast. And one of the things that she shared in her podcast was when we feel ourselves affected by energy and being pulled by energy, often it's because that we have open doors, right? And this is something that I was already very aware of. I knew after Hurricane Ida, my energy was blown wide open. So I was aware of this. I had the hurricane that was, I think, at the beginning of September. And then I was in the ER in October. That would have been 3 years ago, because I was bleeding so much from stress vaginally. And so I ended up in the ER. They had to give me 2 units of blood because I had lost so much blood. And then, so that was October. And then January, the beginning of January, Ken was in his accident. And so I had all of these events in a short amount of time, and my energy was wide open. And I knew that I was being initiated into trauma. It felt very shamanic for me. And all I could think about at the time was like, oh, wow, this is what people must experience. Like, I felt like I wanted to be as awake and aware in the process as I could so that I could help other people that potentially were going through some level of disaster, some level of divine rearrangement, right? And also like divine deconstruction. And so, yeah, I really took the medicine the best that I could. And there were moments that were extremely, extremely challenging, right? And one of the things for me is I feel like I had to come face to face with reality. So everything that I feel like I knew for myself and all of these constructs of reality that I had created for myself from when I was a little girl, and also some of it from what I was taught, right? Whether that was taught by my mother, by religion, through even the energy trainings that I've taken, mindset trainings, business coaching, all of these things, right? These constructs and these concepts that I had created for myself to hold me and keep me safe, they were shattered. And so everything was up for question. Everything was up for negotiation. And I, at some of my deepest, darkest moments, I didn't know what was real. And, yeah, I'm not really wanting to go down the rabbit hole of sharing that whole process. But I also want to honor it. I want to honor this place because if you're listening and you're like, yep, I've been there, I honor you. I really, truly want to honor you. Or if you're feeling there in this moment, I also just really want to offer presence to that place. It's a real place. And it's terrifying. So I really want to honor this space. And if you're feeling a level of fear or terror, right, as you are potentially on the edge of your business, and you might feel this longing inside, right? Like, I know I'm made for more. I don't understand. Why am I having to have this experience? right, of whatever it is, whether it's health issues, whether it was a big loss, right, a death, or losing a home, or having a partner that was in a tragic accident. I just want to, again, honor this space. Oh. Oh, I don't know if you heard Red, but I love you. Thank you. So Red confirms. Yes, it's painful and it's so real. Oh. And for me, this space, it has shown me some of the deepest places of love that exist in me. But also this current of love, like the potency of it. I don't know if we'll ever fully understand the depths of what love is, but I feel like through some of these dark nights, like I literally danced with it, I touched it, I tasted it. And there's so much richness, right? It can be terrifying, it can be excruciating, and yet there's something here. And so, yes, I really want to honor this space. And I'm not sharing this as a way of, oh my God, let's get you out. When the time is ripe, I promise you, life will move you through it. And there's a level of surrender that needs to happen for that process to occur. Yeah. So I want to just invite you here to take a few breaths and find some orientation to where you are in your process, and also potentially to this conversation. I feel like the current is kind of taking on a life of its own. So I'm going to also orient to keep us somewhat grounded here. So to circle back, I listened to my friend's podcast, right? And she talked about these open doors. And when we have the open energy, we're more likely to be influenced by outside energy. And so I was very aware, right, that the past few years I've been doing a lot of reconstruction to rebuild my energetic body and to learn how to hold myself in a new way, right? So all of those concepts, right, that I was using to keep myself safe and to hold me, they were shattered. And so I had to very intentionally learn this deep, deep, deep level of discernment so that I could consciously weave things back together in my life in a way that is more true to who I am on a soul level. Right? The things that I value most, the things that deeply, deeply nourish me and fuel me. Those were at the center of everything that I was weaving, right? They were the core of my intention that I was holding. And so I listened to her podcast and I kind of like thought a little bit. I'm like, where do I have open doors, right? And at the same time, I wasn't like fully like searching for them or trying to figure it out, but it was like a little seed was planted or activated. And I think it was later that afternoon, or it might have been the next day. I'm not 100% sure, but Ken has been gone. So he is working Hurricane Milton. So he's currently in Florida. And Hurricane Helena, which was, I don't know, it might have been a month ago now, really opened this portal for me of grief and also of healing from the 3 years ago, right? The hurricane when I lost my home 3 years ago. So all of this kind of like re-emerged a few weeks ago. And then I'm not exactly sure what day it was. It might have been Thursday. He decided that he was going to work Hurricane Milton. And so he left to go to Florida. And as I was sitting on my sofa, it was like this deep grief just hit me. So this was a few days ago. And it was like I could feel these doors that were still open. Right? And so I started to get really curious about what they were. And like one of them was when I went to the hospital in October, Ken was working. And so he wasn't there. And so it was like this feeling of just feeling so alone. And then, here I am. I've been moving the needle forward in my business, stepping into my work again, which is kind of vulnerable. And last week I had a family member that had a very, very big health thing and had surgery. And so that was really, really kind of tender in my heart. And these are just a few things, and then he's gone, right? And so there's the fear of like him actually being gone and being on the ground working the storm. And then there's like just this part of me that misses him, right? And so as I was sitting there, I could just feel all of this sadness and all of this grief, and I could feel the door, the door that was open. And so what I did was I sat there with it, and I made the decision that I was going to work with the energy there. And I made the decision that I was ready to close the door, and I was willing to complete that process for myself. And so what that looked like was sitting with the grief, right? Of, some of those moments when I needed Ken, he was working the storm. And so sitting with that and having conversations with my little girl, like, discerning, like, okay, well, where is there something that she was taught, or maybe that she thinks that might not necessarily be true of this reality that we're in now, right? And this has been a place, Ken's work, it's kind of been confusing for me because I've never had anybody in the service or in a job where, someone that I loved was like a first line worker. I've never experienced that. And so my parents both had very stable jobs. My mom was a teacher. My stepdad worked for wildlife and fisheries most of my like growing up years, and then he did contract work. Um, but for the most part, they came home every night, and if they were gone, there was somewhat of a map of like what that looked like. And so Ken's job has been like a real big stretch for me. And also, it's like, some of the time when I want to be selfish and I'm like, well, I really want you home. And then it's like, okay, well, there's 3 million people out of power in Florida, and he's going to help these people. Right. And so it's been a little bit of a mind dance for me, right? Because I'm like, well, it's confusing. And I've had to learn how to like create space for both of these things. And I'm in this process right now of like learning how to hold myself differently and learning how to be in relationship with him when he's gone. In a way that supports him in his work and also is true for me, and that in itself is a little bit of a learning curve for me as well. But to to root back into, you know, what I was sharing about the door, I had to let myself feel the feelings. I had to let myself be fully in the experience. And sometimes we want to close doors and it's not time to close doors. Sometimes we might have energetic vows or contracts that are actually keeping the door open. And that vow or contract, it can be something within ourselves. Like, my throat. One that I've held for a really long time was around responsibility or fighting for what I want, or fighting to be here. That was something, probably the past 3 years, I would say, I worked through, and, I feel freer now. I don't feel controlled by that. I don't feel triggered into it or reactive, right? I'm not in the reaction. And so sometimes, when we are healing these places, we need to be held. We need to have a safe space where someone can hold us, someone can see us, someone can guide us. Throughout the past few years, I certainly worked with shamans at different times, and different practitioners, sometimes EFT, somatic energy work, plant medicine. Depending on where I felt guided, I also worked with herbs, flower remedies, homeopaths. And each little thing, as I listened very closely to my intuition and to what I was being guided towards, each little breadcrumb was like a remembrance of like, oh yes, I am supported. Oh yes, I can trust myself. Right? And so it's like that's also part of rebuilding these threads. And the last thing that I want to say here, I feel like this conversation, I could go really, really deep. And I'm not 100% what's being asked or that's going to be of what's most of service here. That was a little wordy, but I don't feel like that's going to be of highest service here. But what I want to say here is there's this belief that when we're experiencing some level of trauma, or like we're in a wound, right? Or our wound continues to get triggered, or there's a lot of fear, even maybe terror, right? There can be this belief that we need to heal this first before we do the next thing or before we move forward. And what I found for myself is that's not necessarily true. Actually, what I needed to move forward was to take steps. And so some of what that looked like, and I'm going to start from the most basic, was when I was having a trauma response or a panic attack or an anxiety attack, it was actually allowing myself to communicate it to, most of the time it was Ken, because he's the person that's the closest to me and with me most of the time. Sometimes it was other family members, but it was letting myself communicate like what was happening, and then also the details of what was happening, like what I was sensing or experiencing. And for me, a lot of it was very shamanic, and so I was being brought into these shamanic realms, and then I would hit these edges of fear and terror, and a lot of times not knowing what was happening or what it was that I was feeling. I felt like I was in these places that I had never really been to before, and I didn't know what it was or if I was really safe. And so, like I said, that was from the shamanic lens, what I was experiencing. And I think that that's, on an energetic level, what is actually happening, right? We start to feel really unsafe. We don't know if we're safe, even though we might not be consciously thinking that. That's what's happening. And so the more I let myself communicate it, then I would start to settle. And that was like one of my first steps. My next step in the process was letting myself have the experience. So even if I was full-blown shaking or crying, right? Letting it happen, not making it mean anything, know that I was releasing energy. And so that was like one of the mindset things that really helped me. I'm willing to allow the energy to move. I'm willing to allow the energy to release, right? Once it starts to move, once it starts to release, then we can begin to refine it. But it's really hard to refine it when we're holding on for dear life and we're not letting it flow at all, right? So we have to just let it flow before we can begin to refine it. And being okay with apologizing, right? And taking responsibility where we need to take responsibility, because it is messy. It's a messy process. So that was the second thing I did. And then the third thing that I did was get really, really clear on what it was that I needed. And, there came a point where at one time what I needed was a routine. So like doing my dishes and, my house chores were part of my routine. The dog was part of my routine, the animals, using the earthly things to create a routine for myself. And then I got to the place of the thing that I needed was to be around other people, to have a job. And so I put myself in a job, right? And I'm not saying that this is where you are and this is what you need to do, but I'm sharing this from a place of we think that we need to go in and we need to heal the thing. And the truth is, it happens through movement. It happens through allowing the energy to flow and allowing the energy to move. And so I really want to give you a lot of space and a lot of permission to allow the energy to move. And you can get really curious with yourself of like, where is it that you are needing to close doors? Where is it that you're needing to say like, okay, I see this energy loop and I don't want to participate in it anymore. And to really sit at that edge and get curious, like what needs to happen so that I can end this energy loop. And sometimes it's just making the decision. It's just making the decision that you're absolutely done and that you need something different. And what I would say is get like as crystal clear as possible on what the thing is that you need. That's what's really important. And that is the thing that's going to keep you anchored in yourself at all times. And, you know, today what I could really feel is, you know, the way that we stay centered in ourself, the way that we don't get derailed by the outside noise, by the chaos, by the grief, by the pain, right, of what is actually happening in the world right now. The way that we stay centered is by anchoring deeply within ourselves and what we need and focusing on that. And it's not about shutting out all the other things. It's not about putting your blinders on to all the other things. When you get really centered in your own heart and in your own essence, you have a different capacity. You're able to receive what's happening in the world from a different place. And then you can feel called or moved to respond versus being in a reaction place. And for me, moving forward in my business, it has been a calling. And most of the women that I work with, it's a calling for them. So it's not about wanting to make $1 million. You know, most of them are like, actually, I'd prefer not to charge for my services and do things for free. But it's a calling and I cannot not do it. I have to listen. My health depends on it. My relationships depend on it. If I don't do it, I can't fully be myself. I have to do it. It's like a soul requirement to, one, step into myself, and two, to be who I am. It is safe for you to be who you are. It is needed. You are needed. If this lands for you, if it helps you, please leave me a comment. Come to the Soul Inspired Success Facebook community. Send me an email and let me know. I love you. Bye for now.